Chapter 1. The Foundation of the Empire. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. My real name is Mark, but for the sake of this story, call me Mark. I'm 34 years old, and up until roughly 8 months ago, I was living what I genuinely believed was the textbook definition of a quiet, hard-earned, successful American dream. To understand how deep this knife ended up twisting, you have to understand the foundation. You have to understand who these people were to me, because betrayed trust doesn't hurt unless it sits on top of years of real, deep, unquestioned affection. I met my wife, Sarah, 33, back in our mid-20s. At the time, I was working as a mid-level account executive at a corporate media firm, and she was doing junior brand consulting. She was smart, grounded, and had this quiet, composed ambition that I found incredibly magnetic. She wasn't loud or flashy. She was organized, precise, and had an uncanny ability to make everyone around her feel like she had everything completely under control. We dated for 2 years, got engaged on a trip to the coast, and got married 7 years ago in a small, elegant ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. We bought a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb just outside the city. We spent weekends painting the walls, landscaping the backyard, and talking about our long-term timeline. Get our careers fully locked down, build up a solid 6-figure safety net, and then start having kids around our mid-30s. We had routine. Every Sunday morning, we'd make coffee, read the news, and plan our week. It felt completely bulletproof level safe. Then there was David, 35. David was my best friend from college. We were roommates for 3 out of 4 years in undergrad. We survived late-night study sessions, terrible entry-level jobs, broken-down cars, and messy breakups together. He was the guy who stood next to me as my best man at my wedding. When people talk about having a brother from another mother, that was David. 6 years ago, David and I decided to take the ultimate gamble. We both quit our comfortable corporate jobs and launched a boutique digital marketing and brand strategy firm called Apex Media Group. The division of labor was built on pure synergy. I was the client-facing partner. I handled business development, client acquisition, high-level strategy, and pitch presentations. I was the guy out in the field selling the dream and keeping clients happy. David, on the other hand, was the internal operational engine. He handled back-end infrastructure, digital integration, corporate finance, payroll, and internal administrative ops. We complemented each other perfectly. In the beginning, it was brutal. We operated out of my cramped garage, living on cold pizza and cheap coffee, pulling 80-hour weeks without taking a salary for the first 8 months. But through sheer hustle, we made it work. Within 3 years, we moved out of the garage and hired our first full-time employee. By year 6, Apex Media Group had grown into a thriving enterprise. We had a modern physical office downtown, a core staff of 12 full-time employees, and a portfolio of enterprise clients generating mid-7-figure annual revenues. Because David was a huge part of my professional success, he was also seamlessly integrated into my personal life. He was at our house every single week. He was at our Thanksgiving tables, our summer barbecues, and every birthday party. When David's last serious relationship ended about 3 years ago, Sarah and I practically adopted him into our daily household routine so he wouldn't feel isolated in his apartment. Sarah would routinely cook extra portions of meal-prepped dinners for him to take home for the week. David would come over on Saturdays, grab a beer from my fridge without asking, and help me repair the back deck or tune up the lawnmower. He didn't feel like a guest. He felt like family. Looking back now, the red flags weren't invisible. They were right in front of my face every single day. But when you look at people through glasses tinted with 10 years of absolute, unconditional trust, red flags just look like ordinary scenery. Chapter 2. The Silent Restructuring. The slow-motion setup for my execution began about 18 months ago. At the time, the business was experiencing a massive growth spurt. We had just signed 2 major regional healthcare accounts, which increased our monthly recurring revenue by almost 40%. With that extra revenue came administrative complexity. One afternoon in early spring, David walked into my office holding a glass of iced coffee and a stack of financial printouts. He sat down across from me, looking every bit the diligent, proactive chief operating officer he was supposed to be. "Mark, we need to talk about corporate cash flow and tax optimization for the upcoming fiscal year," David said, laying the papers out on my desk. "Our top-line revenue is hitting a bracket where state and federal corporate taxes are going to eat us alive if we keep taking high baseline salaries." I leaned back in my chair, listening. Finance was David's domain. I trusted his judgment implicitly. "All right, what are you proposing?" "I spoke with our external CPA team last week," David explained, pointing to a series of highlighted figures on the ledger. "If we restructure our executive compensation, specifically yours and mine, we can significantly reduce our payroll tax burden. Instead of taking high W-2 salary draws every 2 weeks, we drop our base salary down to a modest baseline, say $75,000 each. Then we take the remainder of our actual compensation out as quarterly owner profit distributions, or dividends. On top of that, we start routing more of our operational overhead through specialized third-party vendor retainers to max out our corporate deductions." It sounded like standard, intelligent corporate tax planning. I had no reason to second-guess him. David had been handling our books with our CPA for 6 years without a single hitch. "If the CPA says it's legal and saves us 6 figures in liabilities, I'm all for it," I said. "Just set up the paperwork and tell me where to sign." David smiled, pulled a pen out of his pocket, and handed me the board resolution documents. "Already drafted. Just sign here, and I'll handle the rest with payroll and the state filing." I signed the documents without reading the fine print. That pen stroke effectively handed David unilateral control over how contractor payouts and discretionary corporate disbursements were categorized in our internal software. Around that exact same time, a subtle shift began occurring at home with Sarah. Sarah was working as a senior marketing strategist for a mid-sized regional corporate firm. One evening, over dinner, she casually brought up that she was thinking about taking on independent, high-level consulting work on the side. "A boutique marketing agency based out of the neighboring city reached out to me," she said, cutting her steak. "They need a high-level strategist to run point on weekend campaigns and evening strategy sessions for some of their major retail clients. It's a lot of extra hours, but the pay is incredible, and it could eventually help me launch my own independent firm." I was thrilled for her. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Babe, that's amazing. You've got the skills for it. If you want to put in the hours, I'm 100% behind you. Don't worry about household stuff. I can take care of dinner and groceries on the nights you're working late." "Thanks, Mark," she said, giving me a warm, loving smile. "It might mean some late nights at the office and a few weekend strategy retreats over the next few months, but it's going to be so worth it for our long-term savings." And so, the new routine began. Sarah started working late 3 or 4 nights a week. She would text me around 6:00 p.m. saying her client meeting was running over and that she'd grab dinner near her office. She started taking weekend trips, what she described as regional strategy sprints or client retreats in neighboring cities. I would kiss her goodbye on Friday afternoons, pack her a water bottle, and tell her to drive safely. When she was away, I would send her encouraging texts. "Hope the pitch went great today. Proud of you, can't wait for you to get home." Meanwhile, David's schedule suddenly became equally frantic. He started bowing out of our regular Friday night drinks, claiming he was buried in back-end server migrations, vendor renegotiations, or late client calls. "Man, this operational overhaul is kicking my ass," David would sigh, rubbing his neck in the office break room. I'm staying late tonight to recode our automated client reporting dashboard. Don't kill yourself, Dave, I'd tell him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Go home early, grab a beer. We can finish it next week. Nah, you know me. David would laugh. I gotta get it done. In reality, neither of them was at work. Neither of them was working late. The system they were building was already in motion, and I was actively cheering them both on from the sidelines like a complete fool. Chapter 3. Small Cracks and Rationalizations. Looking back, the human brain is a fascinatingly dangerous instrument. When you love and trust people, your mind creates a protective layer of cognitive dissonance. It takes glaring, undeniable anomalies and smooths them over with plausible explanations, because accepting the truth would cause your entire emotional reality to implode. The first physical anomaly occurred in late October. David and I were scheduled to host a dinner meeting with the chief marketing officer of a prospective major client, an account that would have yielded over $200,000 in annualized revenue for our firm. The dinner was booked for 7:30 p.m. at a high-end steakhouse downtown. At roughly 5:15 p.m., as I was finishing up some emails in my office, my phone rang. It was David. When I answered, he sounded terrible. He was coughing heavily, his voice raspy and strained. "Mark, cough. Man, I am so sorry," he stammered. "I don't know what happened, but I took 2 bites of my lunch catering an hour ago and I've been bent over the bathroom sink ever since. I've got full-blown food poisoning. I can barely stand up." "Jesus, Dave," I said, immediately concerned. "Don't worry about the dinner. Go home, lay down, drink fluids. I can handle the client solo." "Are you sure?" David wheezed. "I feel awful leaving you hanging on a major pitch." "Bro, stop. It's totally fine. Take care of yourself. Text me if you need me to drop off medicine or anything." I went to the client dinner alone. I made excuses for David's absence, nailed the presentation, signed the preliminary letter of intent, and settled the tab around 9:00 p.m. As I was driving home, I had to pass near David's apartment complex. Remembering how sick he sounded, I decided to do what any good friend would do. I pulled off the highway, stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy, bought 2 big bottles of electrolyte solutions, crackers, and nausea medication, and drove over to his building to leave them on his front doorstep. I pulled into his apartment parking lot around 9:45 p.m. His designated parking space was completely empty. His silver Audi wasn't anywhere in the lot. I pulled out my phone and sent him a quick text. "Hey man, just stopped by your place to leave some electrolytes and meds on your porch, but looks like your car gone. You at urgent care." I sat in my idling car for 20 minutes. No reply. Finally, at 10:10 p.m., my phone buzzed. "David, hey man, thanks so much, really appreciate it. Yeah, my stomach got so bad I had to drive down to the 24-hour urgent care clinic on 4th Street. In and out, got a prescription shot. Staying at my sister's house on the east side tonight so she can monitor me. Leave the stuff on the porch, I'll grab it tomorrow." It made total sense. Why wouldn't it? He went to urgent care, then went to his sister's house. I texted him a thumbs-up emoji, drove home, and went to bed. 3 days later, I was giving Sarah's SUV a routine cleaning. I like to keep our cars maintained, so I was vacuuming the floor mats and changing out the cabin air filter. To reach the air filter housing behind the glove box, I had to remove the contents of the compartment: the owner's manual, registration papers, and a small leather pouch. As I opened the manual, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fell onto the floor mat. I picked it up. It was a valet parking receipt from the Grandview Lodge and Spa, a luxury boutique resort located in the mountains roughly 3 hours away from our city. I looked at the date, stamped on the top of the thermal paper, October 24th. The exact same night David had food poisoning. The exact same night David was supposedly at urgent care and sleeping at his sister's house. My mind didn't immediately jump to infidelity or financial treason. Instead, I just felt a strange, quiet confusion. That evening, while Sarah was in the kitchen pouring a glass of wine after work, I held up the receipt. "Hey babe," I said casually. "I was changing your cabin air filter today and found this in your manual. Did you go up to Grandview Lodge last month?" Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't drop her wine glass. She didn't freeze. Her facial expression remained entirely relaxed, transitioning smoothly into a subtle, tired sigh. "Oh, yeah," she said, leaning against the counter and taking a sip of wine. "That was for that emergency client strategy retreat I told you about. The brand team booked us all rooms up at the lodge for a 48-hour deep dive. It was absolute chaos, 12-hour work sessions in conference rooms. I meant to throw that receipt in my tax expense folder. Thanks for finding it." She was so utterly unbothered, so conversational, that my brain instantly swallowed every shred of suspicion. "Ah, gotcha," I said. "Man, that sounds exhausting." "It really was," she smiled, walking over and kissing me on the cheek. "I'm just glad that campaign is wrapped up." I felt a flash of shame for even letting a fleeting question form in my head. I put the receipt on her desk and didn't mention it again. That is the true danger of dealing with sociopathic deception. They don't panic when confronted with minor anomalies. They use your own love, comfort, and desire for stability as a shield against you. You want to believe them, so you do. Chapter 4. The IRS Audit Letter. The entire elaborate structure they had built began to unravel not because of a careless text message, a slip of the tongue, or a dramatic slip-up. It unraveled because of the cold, unfeeling, automated bureaucracy of the Internal Revenue Service. It happened on a Tuesday morning in mid-January. I arrived at the office early, around 8:00 a.m., grabbed a cup of coffee, and began going through the corporate mail stack that had accumulated over the weekend. Tucked between trade magazines and software subscription invoices was an official white envelope with a government return address. Internal Revenue Service Small Business/Self-Employed Division. I opened it. It was a formal notification of a Phase 1 balance audit for Apex Media Group for the previous 2 tax years. Now, corporate audits aren't inherently terrifying for small to mid-sized businesses. When you reach a certain revenue threshold, random compliance checks happen. The letter requested standard documentation, complete payroll distributions, owner dividend ledgers, external 1099 contractor expense receipts, and secondary corporate account disclosures. I took the letter, walked down the hall, and knocked on David's office door. "Hey Dave, got some fun mail," I said, dropping the paper onto his desk. David picked up the letter, read the header, and for a split second, a fraction of a second, I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered panic cross his face. His knuckles turned white as he held the paper. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the panic vanished, replaced by his usual calm, dismissive demeanor. "Oh, fantastic," David scoffed, rolling his eyes and tossing the letter back onto his desk. "Just what we need, more government red tape to waste our time." "Is everything in order on our side?" I asked. "Of course it is," David said quickly. "Our CPA handles all of this. It's just a routine administrative headache. Look, don't worry your head about this at all. You've got to focus on closing that new tech account this month. I'll take point on coordinating with the CPA, gathering the backup receipts, and sending everything over to the auditor. You don't need to touch a thing." "You sure?" I offered. "I can help pull client contract files if you need extra hands." No, absolutely not," David insisted, rising from his chair and clapping me on the shoulder. "Seriously, Mark, operations and finance are my job. Go sell. Let me handle the boring stuff. I thanked him and walked back to my office. Over the next 3 weeks, however, David's behavior underwent a dramatic transformation. The calm, relaxed business partner I had known for 6 years disappeared. He became hypervigilant, irritable, and noticeably jumpy. Prior to the audit letter, David's office door was always open. We had an open-door policy across the entire executive suite. Now, his door was constantly closed. Whenever he stepped away from his desk, even just to walk down the hall to grab a bottle of water or use the restroom, he would lock his office door behind him. If I walked into his office while he was at his computer, he would instantly minimize whatever browser tab or spreadsheet he was working on, or flip his phone face down on his desk. One afternoon, I walked into the break room while he was making coffee. He was typing frantically on his phone. When I said, "Hey, Dave," he jumped nearly 3 inches off the ground, dropping his coffee spoon onto the counter. "Whoa, easy man," I laughed. "Jump toxic much?" "Jesus, Mark," David snapped, his voice sharp and aggressive. "Don't sneak up on people like that. I'm under a massive amount of stress trying to clear this audit nonsense while managing payroll." "Sorry, man, just came to get water," I said, taken aback by his hostility. "Take a breather." He muttered an apology, grabbed his coffee, and hurried back to his locked office. I knew the audit was stressing him out, but his reaction felt completely disproportionate. If our books were clean, an audit was merely a tedious paper exercise. Why was he acting like a man awaiting a death sentence? The answer came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early February. Chapter 5, The File on the Desk. David had left the office around 2:00 p.m., claiming he had an off-site appointment with our bank's commercial lending officer to discuss an operational line of credit. About an hour after he left, there was a quiet knock on my open office door. It was Alina. Alina was our senior internal corporate accountant. She was a woman in her late 40s, incredibly quiet, endlessly meticulous, and wildly intelligent. We had hired her away from a major accounting firm 4 years prior, and she managed our day-to-day ledger inputs, vendor payables, and invoice reconciliations. When I looked up, I saw that Alina looked visibly shaken. Her face was pale, and she was carrying a thick, red accordion folder tucked tightly against her chest. "Mark, do you have a few minutes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "And can you close your door, please?" A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Sure, Alina, what's going on?" I stood up, closed the door, pulled the blinds over the interior windows facing the hallway, and sat back down. "Is everything okay?" Alina sat down in the chair across from my desk. She placed the red folder on the mahogany wood, rested her hands on top of it, and looked me dead in the eye. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but laced with grave concern. "I need to show you something. And before I show you, I need you to promise me that you will hear me out completely, look at these documents objectively, and promise not to say a word to David until you have processed everything." My heart rate immediately spiked. "Alina, you're scaring me. What is it?" Over the last 3 weeks, David asked me to pull and organize all vendor expense files from 2 years ago to present for the IRS audit response, Alina explained. He gave me a specific list of accounts to compile and told me that he would personally handle all executive-level vendor files himself. She opened the red folder. Inside were dozens of spreadsheet printouts, bank wire confirmations, and corporate registry documents. "I've been doing corporate accounting for 22 years, Mark," Alina continued. "When a manager tells me not to look at specific vendor files, my professional instinct tells me that those are the exact files that need to be audited." She pulled out a spreadsheet, highlighted in bright neon yellow. While David was out of the office yesterday, I logged into our primary operational clearing account using my administrative master key to verify vendor tax identification numbers, she said, placing the spreadsheet in front of me. I found a recurring, automated monthly transfer that has been executing on the first of every single month for the past 24 months. I leaned over and looked at the numbers. Every month, like clockwork, a sum of $8,500 was being wired out of Apex Media Group's primary operating account into an external business entity. Over 24 months, that equaled $204,000. What is this? I asked, my brow furrowing. Vanguard Strategic Media LLC? I've never heard of this vendor. What services are they providing us? That's what I asked David 2 weeks ago, Alina said softly. I saw the line items listed in our internal software as subcontracted digital infrastructure strategy. When I asked David for the master contract agreement, deliverables logs, and W-9 form for Vanguard Strategic Media, so I could include them in the IRS packet, David got extremely defensive. He told me that Vanguard was a confidential, high-level advisory firm that only he and you manage directly. He told me it was above my pay grade, and ordered me to remove those ledger lines from the general audit report. I stared at her. I have never seen this company in my life. I have never approved a single payment to Vanguard Strategic Media. I know, Alina said quietly. Because after David talked to me like that, I did a deep dive public records search through the Secretary of State Business Registry database. Alina reached into the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the desk toward me. It was an official state business entity registration, filing for Vanguard Strategic Media, LLC. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, looking for the name of the registered agent and sole managing partner. Printed clearly in black ink was the owner's name. Sarah Miller. My home address was listed as the principal corporate mailing address. My wife's personal cell phone number and private email address were listed as the primary contact information. Chapter 6, The Descent into the Abyss. I remember staring at that name on the page for what felt like an eternity. The air in my office suddenly felt thin, cold, and entirely devoid of oxygen. The background noise of the office, the distant hum of the HVAC system, the faint clicking of keyboards down the hall, completely faded away into absolute, suffocating silence. Sarah. My wife. The woman I kissed every morning before leaving for work. The woman I was planning to build a family with. The woman who sat across from me at the dinner table last night, talking about mortgage rates and summer vacations. She was the sole owner of a shell company that had been systematically draining $8,500 a month out of my business for 2 solid years. Mark, are you okay? Alina's voice broke through the fog. I slowly looked up from the paper. I could feel my pulse hammering against my temples, but a strange, terrifying wave of absolute, freezing calm suddenly washed over my body. It was like a shock response, my brain entirely shutting down emotional processing in order to prevent a complete collapse. Alina, I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was completely flat, measured, and stripped of all inflection. Are there any other accounts? I don't know, Alina admitted, her eyes filled with sympathy. I only dug into the Vanguard entity because the transaction amounts were identical every month. But Mark, if David was manually categorizing these transactions, there could be other disguised accounts. I haven't audited the discretionary petty cash, the executive credit card statements, or the subcontractor accounts from 3 years ago. I took a deep breath, folded the state registration document carefully, and placed it inside my jacket pocket. Alina, I said, looking her directly in the eyes, you have been an incredible asset to this company, and what you just did took immense courage. I need you to do something for me right now. Anything, Mark. You do not say a single word about this to anyone. Not to David, not to the staff, not to your spouse. You do not touch these specific files again on the office network. If David asks you about the Vanguard files again, tell him you took them off the audit spreadsheet just like he asked. Elena nodded firmly. Understood. I want you to take the rest of the day off, I added. Go home, I will handle this. After Elena left my office and closed the door behind her, I sat alone in the dim light for nearly 2 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't punch a wall. I just sat there, staring at the wall, as every memory of the last 3 years began to reconfigure itself in my head. The late-night consulting work Sarah was doing. The weekend, client strategy retreats in neighboring cities. David's sudden food poisoning and his empty apartment driveway. The valet parking, receipt from the Grandview Lodge and Spa. David's insistence on handling executive compensation and audit preparations alone. They weren't just stealing money from my business. They weren't just executing a financial scam. They were having a full-blown, long-term affair. They were sleeping together, traveling together, living a completely separate secondary life together, and they were using my own hard-earned corporate revenue to pay for every single bit of it. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that it encompassed every single pillar of my existence. My marriage, my best friendship, my professional life, and my financial security. I had 2 choices in that moment. Choice 1, I could wait for David to return from his bank meeting, grab him by the throat, drag him into the hallway, cause a massive scene, drive home, scream at my wife, and burn the house down in a blind, emotional rage. Choice 2, I could shut my mouth, bury my emotions under 6 feet of ice, play completely dumb, and execute a cold, methodical, surgical response that would legally, financially, and socially annihilate them both beyond any possibility of recovery. I chose choice 2. Chapter 7, The Master Plan. At 4:30 p.m. that same afternoon, I picked up my phone and made a call to a high school classmate of mine named Richard. Richard was now a senior partner at one of the premier corporate litigation and high-asset divorce law firms in the state. Richard, it's Mark, I said when he answered. I need an emergency, off-the-record consultation with you and the best forensic accountant your firm works with. Today, if possible. Hearing the tone of my voice, Richard didn't ask questions. Be at my office at 6:30 p.m. Use the private back entrance. I left the office early, drove straight to Richard's firm downtown, and spent 3 hours in a soundproof conference room with Richard and a brilliant private forensic auditor named Arthur. I laid out the state business registration document, the highlighted spreadsheet entries Elena had given me, and explained the entire situation. The joint business ownership with David, the marriage to Sarah, and the suspicion of an ongoing affair funded by embezzled corporate capital. When I finished, Richard leaned back in his leather chair, laced his fingers together, and looked at me with an intense, razor-sharp focus. Mark, Richard said, you are in a uniquely powerful position right now, but only if you maintain complete emotional discipline. Right now, they have no idea that you know. They think they are entirely safe. The absolute worst thing you could do right now is confront either of them. Why? I asked. Because the moment you confront them, Richard explained, the legal terrain shifts from strategic preparation to panic defense. David will wipe his laptops, scrub corporate servers, alter secondary ledgers, and transfer funds into offshore or untraceable accounts. Sarah will hire a divorce lawyer, claim she was an innocent bystander, file for emergency spousal support, freeze your joint personal bank accounts, and demand half of your home and business equity. You will end up in a 5-year legal war of attrition, where half your assets get eaten up by legal fees. Arthur, the forensic auditor, chimed in. Right now, you have unfettered access to all corporate servers, physical files, personal tax records, and joint bank accounts. We need time to conduct a silent, comprehensive forensic audit under full legal privilege. We need to follow every dollar, uncover every secret account, and establish an unassailable mountain of evidence before they realize the trap is sprung. How long do you need? I asked. Give me 5 weeks, Arthur said. Act completely normal, be the loving husband at home, be the clueless, trusting business partner at work. Smile, laugh at their jokes, drink coffee with them, and let us work in the dark. Living a lie is difficult. Living a lie with the people who are actively destroying your life is a form of psychological torture. For the next 35 days, I put on the greatest acting performance of my life. Every single morning, I woke up next to Sarah. I looked at her face on the pillow, the woman I had loved for nearly a decade, and felt a wave of absolute revulsion. But I forced myself to smile. I kissed her forehead. I made her favorite espresso. I asked her about her schedule, listened to her lie about her consulting clients, and wished her a wonderful day. Every single workday, I walked into Apex Media Group, walked into David's office, clapped him on the shoulder, brought him coffee, and discussed our quarterly sales goals. I sat in strategy sessions with him, laughed at his jokes, and listened to him give me advice on work-life balance. And every night, after Sarah went to sleep at home, I would quietly go down to my basement office, open my encrypted laptop, and transmit downloaded corporate server logs, financial transfers, and personal account backups to Arthur and Richard. Chapter 8: Unearthing the Second Life. As Arthur and his forensic team dug deeper into the financial paper trail, the sheer scale and depravity of the betrayal began to surface. It was far worse than a simple embezzlement scheme. Through subpoenaed bank statements, hidden ledger reconciliations, and digital forensic imaging of our corporate servers, which I, as 50% owner, had full legal authority to authorize, Arthur reconstructed the entire timeline. The affair and the financial fraud hadn't started 18 months ago. They had been going on for over 3 years. It started small. David had initially used corporate expense accounts to cover lavish dinners, hotel stays, and spa gifts under the guise of prospective client entertainment. But as they realized how utterly trusting I was, their boldness expanded exponentially. 2 years ago, David and Sarah had established Vanguard Strategic Media, LLC. Using embezzled corporate distributions from Apex Media Group, Vanguard had leased an ultra-luxury, 2-bedroom waterfront condominium in a neighboring city, roughly 45 minutes from my house. They had fully furnished the apartment using stolen company funds, $15,000 in high-end designer furniture, a $6,000 sound system, and custom art pieces. That condo was their secret love nest, a place where they met multiple times a week under the pretense of Sarah's consulting work and David's late-night operational server maintenance. It didn't stop there. Arthur uncovered a secondary, secret checking account tied to Vanguard LLC. Over 3 years, David had funneled a total of $342,000 out of Apex Media Group into this account through a combination of fake vendor invoices, inflated subcontractor retainers, and altered payroll draw categories. They used this money as a personal play fund. First-class flights and luxury resort stays in St. Lucia, Miami, and the Swiss Alps, scheduled during dates when Sarah claimed to be attending regional brand strategy seminars. High-end designer jewelry, watches, and designer handbags purchased for Sarah. A secondary personal lease on a sports car kept in the garage of their secret condo. To make matters infinitely worse, our digital forensic expert managed to extract months of deleted message logs from David's secondary workstation, which auto-synced with his private messaging apps. Reading those transcripts was like taking a poison dagger straight to the heart. They didn't just betray me, they took active, sadistic pleasure in fooling me. In one text thread from November, David wrote to Sarah. Mark was so clueless today. He brought me electrolyte drinks because he thought I had food poisoning. I literally walked out the door 2 minutes after he left to meet you at the condo. Sarah replied, LOL, poor Mark. He's so sweet, but he's just so naive. He made dinner for me last night and cleaned the whole kitchen while I was texting you from the sofa. In another thread from December, they mapped out their ultimate exit strategy. David, once we hit the 400K mark in the Vanguard account, we execute phase 2. I'll start engineering a fake market downturn in our quarterly financials. We tell Mark the firm is losing key accounts and needs to liquidate. Sarah, perfect. Then I file for divorce, claim emotional distress and career sacrifice, demand spousal support and half the house equity. Once the assets are split, we buy the house in Florida and relocate. They were planning to completely ruin me. They were going to drain my business dry, sabotage my livelihood, force me to pay spousal support, take half of the home I had built, and then ride off into the sunset together using my own life savings. I read those messages sitting alone in my basement at 3:00 a.m., tears streaming silently down my face. The sheer malice was astounding, but those tears didn't come from sadness. They came from the sheer heat of a rage that had finally turned into pure, crystalline resolve. They thought I was naive. They thought I was weak. They were about to learn the difference between being naive and choosing to trust. Chapter 9, The Execution. By the 3rd week of March, Richard, Arthur, and my legal team had constructed an airtight, ironclad fortress of legal evidence. We had certified forensic audit reports proving $342,000 in grand larceny, wire fraud, and breach of corporate fiduciary duty by David. Complete corporate filing records proving Sarah was the sole managing partner of the shell entity used to launder the money. Geotrack transaction logs, lease agreements, and photographic evidence linking them to the secret condominium. Hundreds of pages of transcribed digital messages detailing both the affair and the premeditated conspiracy to bankrupt my business and dismantle my personal assets. We are fully loaded, Richard told me in his office on a Monday afternoon. We hold every single card. Now we execute. We picked Thursday morning for the strike. Thursday was significant for 2 reasons. First, David had scheduled a major quarterly presentation via video conference with our top 5 enterprise corporate clients, a presentation he had spent 3 weeks preparing for and was hugely proud of. Second, Sarah was scheduled to be working from home all morning before an afternoon consulting meeting. At 8:00 a.m. on Thursday, I arrived at the Apex Media Group offices. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored dark suit. I had already coordinated with our external legal team and 2 uniformed off-duty police officers from the local department's Financial Crimes Division, who were standing by down the block. At 8:30 a.m., David walked into the office building. He was wearing his best suit, carrying a cup of artisanal coffee, looking relaxed, confident, and completely in his element. Morning, Mark, David said brightly as he walked past my desk. Big day today, ready to impress the client board. Hey, Dave, I said, my voice completely smooth. Before you set up for the call, step into the main boardroom for a second. There's a minor vendor discrepancy we need to sign off on. Sure, no problem, David said, tossing his car keys into the air and catching them. He walked down the carpeted hallway and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom. He expected to see our project managers preparing the projector screen. Instead, sitting at the long mahogany boardroom table were 4 people. My lead litigation attorney, Richard, our forensic auditor, Arthur, a court reporter with a court recording device, and 2 uniformed police officers standing silently by the window. David stopped dead in his tracks. The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly. What is this? David asked, trying to chuckle, though his voice cracked. Did I miss an emergency board meeting? Sit down, David, Richard said in a flat, commanding tone. David looked at me, his eyes wide with sudden confusion. Mark, what's going on? Who are these people? I didn't answer. I walked over to the head of the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Richard pulled a thick, 3-inch binder out of his leather briefcase and slammed it onto the table with a heavy thud. David, Richard said, sliding the binder across the table toward him. This is a comprehensive forensic financial audit of Apex Media Group, covering the past 36 months. David stared at the binder. The color was rapidly draining from his face, turning him a sick, chalky white. Inside this binder, Richard continued, are detailed wire transfer records, bank statements, corporate registration documents, and digital message transcripts regarding Vanguard Strategic Media, LLC. When Richard said the name Vanguard, David's body visibly recoiled as if he had been struck with a physical object. The coffee cup in his hand slipped, spilling hot coffee all over the mahogany table and his suit trousers. He didn't even notice. We know about the $342,000 you embezzled, Richard said calmly. We know about the luxury condominium in Westchester. We know about the secret vacation bookings, the shell checking accounts, and the systematic alteration of payroll draws. And we have full, legally imaged message logs between you and Sarah detailing your explicit plan to bankrupt this firm and defraud Mark. David stood frozen, staring at the binder. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mark, David stammered, turning his terrified eyes toward me. Mark, listen to me, please. It's not what it looks like. I can explain. Shut up, David, I said. My voice was quiet, cold, and utterly devoid of rage. It was the voice of a complete stranger. You don't talk to me, you talk to my attorney. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. David, here is where you currently stand. Standing behind me are 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit. On Mark's desk is a fully drafted, formal criminal complaint charging you with multiple counts of felony grand larceny, corporate wire fraud, and tax evasion. David sank into a boardroom chair, clutching his head in his hands. Oh God! Oh God! However, Richard continued, my client is feeling extraordinarily generous today. We have drafted a comprehensive emergency corporate dissolution and settlement agreement. Here are the terms. You will immediately sign over 100% of your equity and ownership shares in Apex Media Group to Mark for the total sum of $0. You will execute a legally binding confession of judgment, agreeing to pay full financial restitution of $342,000, secured against all your personal retirement accounts, real estate, and vehicle equity. You will immediately surrender all corporate keys, security fobs, laptops, and administrative passwords, and submit to an immediate, permanent escort off this property. If you sign these documents right now, Mark will agree to handle restitution through civil judgment rather than executing the immediate criminal arrest warrant today, though the IRS audit will proceed independently. David was shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen Richard handed him. He looked at the police officers standing by the window. He looked at the massive stack of transcribed text messages detailing his betrayal. He knew he was trapped in a cage of his own making. With trembling hands, David signed every single page of the emergency agreement, surrendering his entire life's work, his business ownership, and his financial freedom in a matter of 12 minutes. Once the final document was signed, Richard took the papers, verified the signatures, and looked at the police officers. Officers, please escort Mr. Miller off the premises immediately, Richard said. He is no longer permitted on this property. 2 officers stepped forward, took David by his arms, and escorted him down the hallway. As David was walked past the open desks of our entire staff, employees stood up from their cubicles, staring in utter shock as our COO was marched out of the building like a common criminal. He didn't look back once. Chapter 10, The Home Front. I didn't stay at the office to celebrate. I had one more stop to make. I took my keys, walked out to my truck, placed a thick manila envelope on the passenger seat, and drove home to the suburbs. I pulled into my driveway at 10:15 a.m. Sarah's SUV was parked in the garage. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. The house was quiet, smelling of warm vanilla candles and fresh coffee. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen island, wearing a comfortable silk robe, sipping her morning coffee with her laptop open in front of her. When she heard the door close, she looked up, surprised. "Mark," she asked, setting her coffee cup down, "what are you doing home so early? Did your morning client call get canceled?" I didn't answer. I walked slowly across the hardwood floor, stood across from her at the kitchen island, pulled the thick manila envelope out from under my arm, and dropped it onto the counter next to her laptop. She looked at the envelope, then looked up at me, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's this?" "Open it," I said flatly. Sarah reached out, unsealed the metal clasp, and pulled out the contents. On top was a formal copy of a divorce petition I had filed 2 hours prior, citing irreconcilable differences, extreme mental cruelty, gross financial misconduct, and marital fraud. Beneath the petition were color printouts of the state business registration for Vanguard Strategic Media, LLC, bearing her signature, bank statements showing monthly transfers to her shell company, photos of her entering the secret condominium with David, and printed transcripts of their text messages mocking me. For 10 seconds, the kitchen was completely silent. I watched her eyes scan the pages. I watched her face transform in real time through a terrifying sequence of emotions. First, mild confusion, then sudden realization, followed by sheer, paralyzing horror. The glass coffee mug in her hand began to rattle against the granite counter. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mark, what is this?" "It's over, Sarah," I said. My voice was completely steady, completely emotionless. She stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floorboards. "Mark, wait, please, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. David manipulated me." She rushed around the kitchen island, tears instantly streaming down her face, reaching out to touch my arm. "Please, Mark." David forced me into this. He was blackmailing me. He told me he was going to ruin your business if I didn't help him with the tax structure. I was trying to protect you. I stepped back out of her reach, staring at her with cold disgust. "You registered the shell company, Sarah," I said. "You signed the bank cards. You decorated the condo in Westchester. You took vacations to St. Lucia with him while telling me you were at work seminars. And you joked in text messages about how naive I was while eating the dinner I bought you." She froze. The lie died instantly in her throat. Seeing that the victim narrative wasn't working, her posture shifted. She dropped to her knees on the kitchen tile, weeping hysterically, grabbing at my pant legs. "Mark, please, I made a horrible mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll give all the money back. Please don't throw away 7 years of marriage." I looked down at her, this woman I had worshipped for nearly a decade, and realized I felt absolutely nothing for her. The love was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, clean emptiness. "You have 2 hours," I said calmly. She looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "What?" "You have 2 hours to pack 1 suitcase of your personal clothing," I told her. "My attorney has already filed an emergency motion for exclusive occupancy of this residence based on financial fraud and domestic misconduct. The locksmith is arriving at 12:30 p.m. to change every lock on this house. Mark, you can't kick me out of my own house, she screamed, her voice turning hysterical. My name is on the mortgage. Your name is on a federal fraud paper trail, Sarah, I replied cold-headedly. If you are still inside this house when the locksmith and my legal representative arrive at 12:30 p.m., I will have the police officers waiting outside enter the property and arrest you as a co-conspirator in an ongoing grand larceny investigation. Her jaw dropped. She looked out the front living room window. Parked down the street was an unmarked legal vehicle waiting quietly. She realized in that singular moment that there was no negotiation, no tearful reconciliation, no manipulation left to deploy. The trap had closed, and she was entirely caught. I turned around, walked out the front door, got into my truck, and drove away, leaving her sobbing hysterically on the kitchen floor. Chapter 11. The Fallout in Scorched Earth. The immediate aftermath of that Thursday was a nuclear explosion that radiated through every single corner of our social, professional, and personal circles. When Sarah realized I was completely serious, she panicked. She called her parents, weeping, attempting to spin a wildly fabricated story that I had suddenly snapped, gone insane, thrown her out of the house, and accused her of fake crimes. Her parents, who had always been traditional, respectable people, immediately called me in a rage, demanding an explanation for why I was abusing their daughter. I didn't argue with them. I simply sent her father a secure digital link containing the forensic audit, the shell company registration with Sarah's signature, and 20 pages of the text messages between Sarah and David detailing their affair and their plan to drain my assets. Her father called me back 2 hours later. He was weeping on the phone. He apologized to me profusely, called his daughter a disgrace, and told her she was no longer welcome in his home. Her own family was so utterly disgusted by the premeditated malice of her actions that they refused to pay for her legal defense or let her stay in their guest room. As for David, his world collapsed at lightspeed. While he had signed over his equity to avoid immediate local police charges on Thursday morning, he could not run from the federal government. Because his embezzlement scheme involved submitting falsified corporate tax returns and fraudulent bank wire transfers across state lines, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division picked up the paper trail during their official audit closeout. 3 months after the confrontation, David was formally indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and filing false tax returns. Facing up to 15 years in federal prison, David had to hire an expensive criminal defense attorney. To pay his legal fees and satisfy the civil judgment restitution he owed me, he was forced to liquidate his entire retirement portfolio, sell his sports car, sell his private equity, and file for personal bankruptcy. His professional reputation in our city was permanently obliterated. In the tight-knit digital marketing industry, word of a corporate officer embezzling mid-six figures and being escorted out by police travels fast. No agency would touch him. Last I heard, he was living in a tiny, dingy studio apartment on the outskirts of town, working an entry-level remote data entry job while awaiting his federal sentencing hearing. As for the legal divorce proceedings with Sarah, it was a total slaughter. Because my legal team presented overwhelming physical evidence of marital asset dissipation and criminal fraud, the divorce judge applied the law with extreme severity. Under state law regarding gross financial misconduct, Sarah was ordered to forfeit all claims to the equity in our marital home. Her claims for spousal support and alimony were completely thrown out of court with prejudice. Furthermore, the judge ruled that she was jointly liable for the legal fees incurred during the forensic recovery of the stolen funds. She walked away from a 7-year marriage with nothing but her personal clothes, an old used hatchback, and a mountain of legal debt. The secret luxury condo she and David had rented. The landlord terminated the lease immediately upon learning of the federal investigation and seized their entire security deposit due to breach of lease terms. Chapter 12. Rebuilding from the Ashes. It has been roughly 8 months now, since that fateful Thursday morning. I would be lying to you if I said I walked away from all of this completely unscarred, smiling, and effortlessly moving on. The reality of betrayal at this scale is that it breaks something deep inside your brain. For the first 3 months, I lived in a state of hypervigilant trauma. I couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart rate spiked. I found myself questioning every single memory from the last decade of my life. I sat in my large, quiet suburban home, looking at empty rooms, wondering how 2 people I loved so deeply could sit at my dinner table, look me in the eye, eat the food I cooked, and smile while actively planning my complete destruction. I started going to intensive trauma therapy twice a week. My therapist told me something that finally gave me permission to heal. Mark, your inability to see their betrayal wasn't a sign of weakness or stupidity. It was a reflection of your own integrity. You treated them with honesty because you are an honest person. They exploited your capacity for trust, but that does not mean you were wrong for being trustworthy. Slowly, day by day, the weight began to lift. I poured my energy into Apex Media Group. With David gone and 100% of the corporate ownership locked under my control, we restructured our entire management framework. I promoted Alina to Chief Operating Officer and Director of Operations, giving her a massive pay raise, a permanent seat on the executive board, and a non-voting profit-sharing equity stake in the company. She earned every single penny of it. Under her brilliant, hyper-meticulous financial oversight, our operating margins improved by 30% in just 2 quarters. We cleared out the old toxicity, hired incredible new talent, and secured 3 new national accounts. The firm is currently on track to record its most profitable year in company history. The air in our downtown office no longer feels heavy or secretive. It feels clean, transparent, and vibrant. I still live in our suburban colonial home. For a while, I thought about selling it to escape the memories. But then I realized, why should I let their filth force me out of the home I paid for and built? I hired contractors, completely gutted the interior, renovated the kitchen, repainted every room, bought completely new furniture, and turned the backyard into a serene outdoor haven. It no longer feels like the house I shared with a lying spouse. It feels like my sanctuary. I sit on my back deck in the quiet evenings now, sipping a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset through the trees. The house is quiet, but it is a peaceful quiet. There are no secrets lurking down the hall. There are no fake business trips, no disguised spreadsheets, no whispers behind locked doors. If there is any lesson, any takeaway I can offer to anyone reading or listening to this, it's this. When you realize someone you love is betraying you, your natural emotional instinct will be to scream, to confront them, to demand answers, and to make a scene. Resist that urge with every fiber of your being. Emotion is the enemy of justice. Betrayers rely on your emotional explosion because it creates chaos, and in chaos, they can hide evidence, craft lies, flip the narrative, and play the victim. Instead, become stone cold. Put your emotions in a box, put on a smile, step back into the shadows, hire professionals, collect the receipts, and let the cold, unfeeling machinery of the law do your fighting for you. Revenge isn't loud. Revenge is administrative, and there is nothing more terrifying to a traitor than a victim who stayed quiet, smiled, and quietly documented every single receipt.